How's it going, everybody? This is Cameron White with White Light Astrology, and welcome back to your favorite weekly horoscope. What the fuck is going on in the universe for June 3rd through June 10th of 2019? Thank you guys so much for being here and liking and sharing and commenting and subscribing. I love and appreciate every single one of you guys, and I'm so glad you can be here this week. I apologize for not being here last week. I was just getting back from Norwalk, and I was way too tired to even do anything regarding horoscopes or anything like that. However, there wasn't too much going on last week, but it's this week and next week where we're going to see a lot more of the planetary action that is kind of highlighting the summer starting to initiate and starting to take place. And that's kind of starting off with this week's highlights with the new moon in Gemini that we get to start this week off with. This is kind of giving us a breath of fresh air, a clear scope of things, a better idea of how things look, and a better idea of how we can, kind of better use our ideas is a good way to put it. Like, when we're talking about a new moon, we're talking about resetting our intentions. We're talking about both of the luminaries in one sign, highlighting one place. This is the sign of Gemini, where we're talking about our ideas, our sense of communication. This is a good time for journaling. This is a good time for kind of just looking at the bigger picture of things and kind of looking at the facts. Now, as we do move forward through this week, we also have Mercury entering Cancer on Tuesday, which is going to be a pretty big deal because later on, as Mercury transits through Cancer, it's going to eventually conjoin the North Node, oppose Saturn, conjoin Mars, and then once it goes into Leo, it's actually going to station retrograde and go back into Cancer. So we have a lot to talk about with Mercury in the next couple of weeks. But also, by the time we get to the end of this week, we have Venus finally entering Gemini, and then we also have the Sun opposing Jupiter. So with this week kind of like, having this fresh new moon to start it off with, and having Mercury change signs, Venus change signs, these are very immediate personal planets. I think that the shift of how we're really feeling and what we're kind of doing with those feelings is really going to play out in a bigger way this week. So with that being said, let's jump into the horoscope. So starting off today on Monday, June 3rd, we're going to have the new moon in Gemini. And like I said before, this is kind of like refreshing our ideas, kind of getting the juices flowing a little bit better, if that's a good way to put it. Having this new moon is kind of giving us some more power with Mercury. Mercury is at the last final degrees of Gemini, and it's still in its favorite sign to be in, so Mercury's still working pretty well. So this is going to be a really good time to get clear of our mentality, clear of what our thoughts and our ideas are, especially as we move into the summer. I know everyone seems to have some type of big idea or big plans that they've got going on. This new moon's going to be a really good time to capture that in a sense of like writing, in a sense of, bullet points, in a sense of, okay, this is my clear idea and this is what I'm doing with it. But also with the new moon in Gemini, this is kind of allowing more clear room for information to come in and out. So as we start this week off, you may feel a little bit more refreshed in your mind. However, later on Monday, we're going to have the moon oppose Jupiter after the new moon. And as the moon opposes Jupiter, and we're going to talk about this later on with the sun opposing Jupiter and Venus opposing Jupiter later on too, is, Gemini is kind of like just getting the information that you need. It's kind of like, all right, I heard, this is the rumor that I heard on the street. This is kind of like what I've made up about it. Now, when you have the moon now in Gemini, it's kind of getting all these ideas. With it opposing Jupiter in Sagittarius, it's like retrograde right now, is kind of like, well, what does that mean, though? Here's the information that you've received. What story are you going to make up about it? What, image are you creating around those facts, around those ideas? And so as the moon opposes Jupiter on later on this evening on Monday, I want you guys to really look at, what is this new moon kind of bringing to you? And with all those ideas, with all of that communication, with all of the refreshness, I want to say, what are you doing with it? And where is that going? And is it in that Jupiter and Sagittarius realm of remaining positive, having a bigger picture? Is it fulfilling that space and, helping you kind of write a little bit more of the narrative to your story that Jupiter's trying to create for you? Those are just good questions to ask. However, as we move forward on Tuesday, on June 4th, this is when we're going to have Mercury enter Cancer. And now, as Mercury has been in Gemini, Mercury's been doing just fine there. When Mercury goes into Cancer, we're seeing Mercury kind of change its tone a little bit more. It's going to be kind of co-present with Mars, and it'll eventually make a conjunction with Mars. So Mars kind of puts this, stringent taste to it that kind of makes Mercury a little bit more sour than usual. But Mercury, the planet of communication, expression, our ideas, our thoughts, how we're kind of going about things, is going into the sign that is about nurturing, that is about protecting, that is about, really just focusing on what our essential needs are. You know, if you watch the monthly horoscopes that I put out, I focused a lot on the Cancer aspect of like, what are our primal needs? What is of necessity? What needs to be protected? That's the other thing with the crab is, you know, it's not always about being sensitive and soft with Cancer, but if you deal with the crab, like they have a hard ass shell and they fight for their lives to defend themselves. And that's an important aspect to look at with Mercury and Cancer is where in our communication, where in our ideas are we focusing on what's going to be best for us, where we need to nurture ourselves, but how do we protect that as well? Now, also on Tuesday, we're going to have the moon going into Cancer along with Mercury too. So this is kind of putting a little bit more of an emotional spin on things. As the moon goes into Cancer, this is kind of going from, you know, the moon in Gemini is like, oh, I kind of feel this way about things. I can see, you know, both sides of the story. The moon going into Cancer is kind of like, all right, well, how do I feel about this story? How do I feel about the facts? What, you know, with all of this information, you know, it's kind of like Gemini is like, here's the agenda that, you know, everyone wants to do, that everyone wants to accomplish. But you're kind of over here like, I'm down to do that stuff, but I need to make sure I do these things first. And so as the moon conjoins Mercury, this is going to be just a really big highlighted time of really looking in depth of like, hey, what are my needs right now? And how can I get that addressed? And how can I express that better? As we move forward on Wednesday, June 5th, that's when we're going to have the moon conjoin Mars and the North Node. This is kind of like, you know, we know what our needs are, we know what we need to do, but actually doing it's the hard part, especially with Mars in Cancer where Mars wants to, you know, Mars wants to go, Mars wants to initiate, he's trying to fucking get some shit done. But in the sign of Cancer, it's a little bit dredgy. And as Mars is getting closer and closer to opposing Saturn exactly, it's like, you know, the ball is slowly starting to come to not a full stop, but it's slowing down a lot. So as the moon conjoins Mars, you can get a little bit frustrated of like having this innate need to, you know, focus on, hey, this is what I need to get done. This is what I want. This is what I've got to protect. This is what my, you know, interests are. It's going to be a little bit hard to put that initiation and put that action right there. So as we get into Wednesday, my biggest suggestion is definitely like, you know, go with the flow of things, do your best to initiate it, but you're going to definitely hit a little bit of obstacles and walls and that's okay. But it's more about, you know, slow and steady wins the race and not just going fast and going all into it. Also on Wednesday, the moon is going to oppose Saturn as it's conjoining Mars and conjoining the North Node. And this is kind of like, you know, Saturn being in Capricorn right now and all of this Mars opposing Saturn, then Mercury will, and then the Sun and Venus will oppose Saturn. This all kind of comes back down to, you know, like we may have these needs that we have to address and that we have to take care of, but Saturn's over here saying no to a lot of that stuff. And the biggest thing that I want to suggest with this is like, it's not just like the universe saying no, it's more about what obstacles, challenges, walls, and barriers are being presented to you and what are you going to do about them. And this isn't about knowing what you're going to do about them right now and taking action on it. This is about asking that question and coming up with the answers, especially as we move on to June and July with those eclipses, because that will be a big point of this. However, this really comes back down to what is blocking you and what is stopping you and what needs to get taken care of in order to handle and address that. But this is just the time right now to really ask those questions. Now, as we move into Thursday, not a whole lot's happening on Thursday, but we are going to have the moon going into Leo. This is kind of giving us a little bit more self-confidence, a little bit more of like, hey, you know, I feel a little bit better about this situation. I've gone through, you know, the motions of things. Where do I need to take back my pride? Where do I need to feel a sense of exuberation and optimism and positivity? The moon in Leo is kind of like, you know, gassing you up to say like, yeah, you can do it. You're the shit. You've got this going on for you. However, as we get into Thursday with the moon just being in Leo and everything else still going on, this is just more of like, you know, you gotta, telling yourself no or telling yourself that you can't doesn't serve anybody justice. That doesn't help you, that doesn't help me, that doesn't help anybody that you're in contact with. So while the moon goes into Leo on Thursday, this is just a big time to tell yourself like, yes, you can. Where can I accomplish these things? I have this vitality and I have this sense of, you know, capability that I can fulfill that, you know, it's kind of like your pride. Your pride can sometimes get in your way, but sometimes it can, you know, be a really good fuel to get you to where you need to go. Then as we get into Friday on June 7th, that's when the moon's going to actually start applying to a trine with Jupiter. So this is kind of gassing more of that up while Jupiter's in Sag and we're kind of like, you know, what do we believe? What's the story that we're writing? Where are we going next? The moon applying to a trine to Jupiter is kind of like gassing you up a little bit more and saying like, yes, you can, this is what you deserve, this is what you want to do, these are the feelings that you're trying to encompass and create. While the moon's in Leo, trining like Jupiter, the biggest thing is just like, let that positivity come in and utilize it, but it's more of like, store it for later, because we're going to definitely need it for later. Then as we get into Saturday on June 8th, that's when we're going to have Venus enter Gemini and the moon will enter Virgo. So we have a little bit of a square between the moon and Venus. However, as the moon goes into Virgo after leaving Leo, moon going into Virgo is kind of like, okay, here's what my needs were. This is the needs that I realized while the moon was in Cancer. This is how I feel about it and how I wish I can go about it with the moon in Leo. The moon in Virgo is kind of like, putting a puzzle together. It's kind of like focusing on all the tiny little details, crossing all your T's and dotting all your I's to make sure that it's perfect. Now, the only problem with this is that this can be a little bit over analytical. This can be, cause some analysis paralysis. The biggest thing while the moon's in Virgo is kind of like, have a healthy dose of planning and a healthy dose of affirming that plan with action, taking affirmative action with this stuff. And it's not about doing everything all at once, but it's about how can I concisely put this puzzle piece together. Like if you got a 2,000 piece puzzle, you're not going to do it in one sitting. Put it on the coffee table and, come back to it when you have the opportunity, but make sure you still put one piece at a time. Also, while we have on Friday, or my bad, Saturday, as we have Venus enter Gemini, this is kind of like Venus going, okay, I was in Taurus, I felt grounded, I felt secure, I know where my value is, I know what I am valuing, I know where I'm wanting to create more security, more beauty, and emphasize that value in. As Venus goes into Gemini, this is like expressing that. This is the sign of of the twins. This is about communicating that. This is about socializing. This is about getting together with people. This is about really, Venus wants to talk about what she likes. Venus wants to explore what she likes. Venus wants to see all that can mentally stimulate her. So as Venus goes into Gemini, this is going to be a really good time to really focus on not just what you do value, but going out and about and kind of getting curious about, where this value can kind of come into play, where love and relationships can come into play, where you can have more fun with the things that you're doing. This is Venus in Gemini. She just wants to have fun. Whew. Now, as we do go into Sunday though, that's when we're going to have the moon do like a lot of shit on Sunday. It's going to square the sun. It's going to square Jupiter. It's going to oppose Neptune. It's going to trine Saturn. It's going to sextile Mercury. And so the moon in Virgo, where it's already kind of dealing with like a little bit of analysis paralysis, kind of overthinking things, but it's wanting to be clear and concise about what it is doing. It's got a lot of aspects going on. It's got a lot of people telling it what to do and, feeding it ideas. The biggest thing is while it's squaring Jupiter, it's squaring the sun, opposing Neptune, sextiling Mercury, trining Saturn. That's a lot to say. This is kind of like where, when let's say if you ever worked in retail before and you have like a rush, like it's Black Friday, like sure, you can have a bajillion things going on, but you've got to kind of like be in the middle of the rush. You kind of have to go, I got to handle it as I go along. Sure, you got a customer complaining about this thing over here. You got someone who's wanting to do a return over here, but you don't have any cash in your register, so you got to do a card swipe and stuff like that. Then you need a manager to do the swipe for that. Plus you're trying to help out this customer. Plus you got someone in the changing room. It's a lot. Now, but the thing is, when you're in that moment, you kind of have to like detach yourself away from whatever it is that you're feeling stressed out about and just focus on the work. Focus on what's being handed in front of you. And while the moon's in Virgo, this is going to be a great time for that. But then as we end the week, as we go into next week on Monday, on June 10th, that's when we're going to have the sun oppose Jupiter. And just like I said earlier with the new moon in Gemini and the moon would later on oppose Jupiter, while the sun opposes Jupiter, this is kind of like, we got all this shit going on. We have all these messages, all this communication, all of these new ideas. There's so much scattered energy. It's kind of like when you go to if you've ever been to some type of, not like a carnival, a festival, like a music festival. There's a lot going on. You can see this artist, that artist, this artist, that artist, but it comes back down to, well, what do you want to do? What's the story that you're trying to create? What's the image in your mind that you've had, and where are you putting that energy forward? The sun in Gemini can kind of I see all of my options and I have all of these great options. I can do anything and everything. But as it opposes Jupiter, this comes back down to don't take action and just because you heard about it doesn't mean it's true. Just because it's in your general vicinity doesn't mean you need to be tied along with it. while it's the sun's opposing Jupiter, this is kind of like looking at the bigger picture of like, well, this is where I'm wanting, now that I have this information, this is where I'm taking with it, this is the narrative I'm going to continue writing with it, and this is where I'm going with it. Not to mention the sun will also be squaring Neptune, and Jupiter will be almost exactly squaring Neptune again, while Jupiter's in the exact middle part of its retrograde. So this is kind of a turning point with Jupiter and Sagittarius right now. So as we get into next Monday, this is kind of like, you know, when you have all this mental stimulation going on with the new moon and Mercury leaving Gemini and Venus entering Gemini, there's a lot of stimulation. It really comes back down to, what are you doing with it? So that's this week. Next week is looking kind of scary, so I'll make sure I put this video out earlier, but next week we have Mars opposing the North Node, we have Mars opposing Saturn, we have Mercury conjoining the North Node, we have Mercury opposing Saturn, then we have the full moon in Sagittarius, and then we're going to have Mercury conjoin Mars for the first time. Next week is going to be pretty fucking serious. So utilize this week and get all the ideas that you need, get the clarity that you need, make a decision to go for it, make the decision to what you're doing with it. Because as we get into next week, this is kind of like facing the authority. This is kind of like addressing the elephant in the room. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching and liking and sharing and commenting and subscribing. I love and appreciate every single one of you, and I'll be seeing you next week.